What's up, guys? Welcome back to Deck Tech for Decks. I'm your host, Caleb. If you want to support me, I now have a Patreon. It's my way to hopefully give back to you while making this my full-time job. You can also use the TCGplayer link in the description down below. I get a little bit of kickback. Liking, commenting, subscribing is also very acceptable. And last but not least, don't forget to follow me on Moxville. It's the best way for you to copy these deck lists, tweak them to your liking, playtest them online, and anything in between. Now, let's get into today's deck tech with Rukarumel. And this girl's exciting because this is the first tribal commander that doesn't feel jank. What this is going to basically do is enable you to run stuff like Reaper King, and then whenever any creature enters the battlefield, it's going to blow up a permanent. Kinda sounds busted. Kinda sounds a little bit of fun. Another thing we can do is run Gigantha in the command zone. Now we can cast all of those sliver lords by just tapping our little elk. Sounds dope to me. Another thing that's going to be super busted is using Magda here, turn all of our slivers into dwarfs, and then we can make treasure tokens and search up MaskWood Nexus pretty easily. So this is going to be a deck where we're just using stuff like My Real Shield of Argive, create a massive board state, Magda creating treasure tokens. It's a bunch of fun. It kind of takes a lot of pieces to put together to make it work, but our commander is going to make it pretty consistent. The warrior tribe is also pretty stacked, having Nigel Blade Blossom and stuff like Chatterfang. So now we're creating a lot of warriors also. This deck can snowball out of control very fast if left alone, and the whole thing holding it together is Gigantha in the companion zone, making sure our color fixing is always on point. We're casting our commander as soon as turn 5, honestly, if we can ramp out and get Gigantha onto the field pretty fast. So if that sounds like a deck tech you're into, let's get into it. Let's kick it off by talking about the cool tribal commanders we get to run. Magda. This girl's one of the best cards in the deck because now all of our slivers will be dwarfs, so whenever they tap to attack, and there's a lot of ways for them to tap for mana in the deck, we're just going to be creating treasure tokens, and then we can immediately use those treasure tokens to search up our MaskWood Nexus. This will allow us to now just tutor up any creature in our deck because all creatures are all creature types. Nigella the Blade Blossom. There is a few infinite combos in the deck that involve her, but it takes a lot of cards to put together, and honestly, I'm just using her to create a massive board state with those warriors, right? Now, all of our slivers are warriors, all of our warriors are slivers, and whenever we're attacking, we're creating a massive board state. My Real Shield of Argive, another card we can use to just create a massive board state. Whenever she attacks, we're basically just going to double the amount of creatures we have on our board. Zirium and Tyrannid Hirudin can do something very similar, except for it's on combat damage instead of on attack, so it's not as good, but still creates that massive board state we're looking for. Urtet, this is one of those infinite combos I was talking about. As long as we have Gemhide Sliver or Mana Weft Sliver on the battlefield and enough creatures to tap for 5 mana, we can go ahead and set off Nigella's ability as much times as we want, and then Urtet will untap those creatures, and then we can tap them again for another combat step immediately. So pretty busted, but honestly takes a lot of setup and a lot of creatures to make it worthwhile. But honestly, this guy's just amazing in the deck. Whenever we cast a sliver, we're adding a mirror to the battlefield, and then we can just buff our entire board state with that ability. Chatterfang Squirrel General. Not only are we doubling up on all those tokens, we also have a solid way to remove creatures from the battlefield. Reaper King. Speaking of a solid way to remove creatures from the battlefield, or anything from the battlefield, Reaper King is going to be absolutely backbreaking in this deck. Atla Pilani Nest Tender. Now we can turn all of our creatures into eggs, basically protecting our board state. If they wipe the board, we're going to throw the same amount of creatures from our deck onto the battlefield, so it's not going to affect us that much, especially when we do have a few ways to bring creatures back from the graveyard. Yuriko! Now, this one's maybe a little bit of a controversial pick, but I couldn't resist the fact that we can just go wide with slivers and then just start revealing the top card of our library, killing our opponents while drawing cards. Let's move on to the slivers we're going to run in the deck. We have Necrotic Sliver. This is going to be solid removal. Harmonic Sliver, again, amazing removal. Mana Weft Sliver and Gemhide Sliver are going to be solid ramp in the deck. Synapse Sliver is going to let us draw cards whenever our creatures are dealing combat damage. Siphon Sliver, just having a little bit of life gain in the deck is always a super solid way to make sure we make it to the late game. Spiteful Sliver, people are not going to want to block our slivers, especially with those massive creatures. Sliver Overlord, Sliver Hive Lord, this is going to give all of our non-token creatures indestructible. And if we do have MaskWood Nexus, that's just indestructible around the board, but really protecting our non-token creatures is going to be super solid. Sliver Grave Mother, just reanimating our biggest shit, throwing it onto the battlefield with that Encore ability, and Smashing Face sounds like a solid route. Cloud, Shredder, Sliver. Flying and haste are incredibly impactful keywords that are going to really help our board state. Moving on, let's talk about how we're changing the typing of our creatures without casting our commander. MaskWood Nexus. Again, this one's insane in the deck because it throws that non-token clause out the window, which is really weird because it's one-sided, right? Our sliver tokens count as the other creature type, but our non-sliver tokens don't count. So all I'm trying to say is no rules. Everything slivers as God intended. Mirror Entity. This guy's honestly better than MaskWood Nexus in the deck, just because he buffs our tokens as well as turning them into every creature type. He also goes infinite with Atla Palani, but you better have a judge present to explain how that works. Arcane Adaptation. Now this does only work for one creature type, but in a pinch that's gonna do it, especially when we go wide with tokens of a certain variety. Now we can turn all of those tokens into our slivers and go ahead and swing out. Vile Duplication, Spark Double, and Sakashima are just gonna straight up double up on our commander, letting us choose another creature type. We also do run Helm of the Host because on top of just having a lot of nutty creatures in the deck to equip this to, equipping it to our commander will make it to where we can choose every creature type in our deck. Moving on to the core of the deck, we have Gigantha. Yes, this is a companion deck, and I know people are looking at the CMC and being like, holy crap, how are we going to cast all of these creatures? Well, this guy in the companion zone is the answer to all of our 5-colored casting problems. Now we can just straight up jam this guy onto the battlefield as early as turn 4 and cast our commander turn 5 with ease, and then we'll still have a bunch of mana open to start casting our sliver spells, such as Sliver Legion. This is going to make our slivers extremely massive, making it to where we can alpha strike and start taking out our opponents. Derevi. I like this guy because he's just going to untap our very impactful creatures as well as untapping our lands. That way we can get like a sorta Feast and Famine. He also does go infinite with a couple creatures. It's not easy to pull off, but it is there. We also do have the opportunity to tap our opponent's stuff down, so that can be useful as well. Marisi, Breaker of the Coils. This guy's insane. As long as we're dealing damage to our opponents, we're going to make sure they're open every turn to take more sliver abuse. I'm pretty sure you guys have noticed by now there's a lot of heavy color pips in the deck, and that is because Gigantha is our companion, so I kind of wanted to build around that, making it to where we can cast these expensive spells just by tapping Gigantha and throwing it onto the battlefield. Because in all honesty, if Gigantha's on the field, we're paying 1 mana for this guy. Muldrotha. This wonderful lady will only cost us 3 mana with Gigantha on the battlefield and give us access to our entire graveyard, which is going to be incredibly impactful. Shared Animosity. This is amazing in the deck because remember, our commander does not count for our creature tokens that are not slivers, so Shared Animosity is a way to get around that. Not only will it buff our slivers, but it will also buff our non-sliver creatures that share a creature type. Super solid in the deck. Bring to Light is an incredibly flexible card. We can shove 5 mana into this and then search up any 5 CMC creature onto the battlefield, or you do get the option to get that instant or sorcery spell, so in a pinch it's just a very solid card. Moving on to ramp, we have Sword of Hearth and Home. This is amazing for not only getting our lands onto the battlefield, but also changing the creature typing, right? Because if we go ahead and slam a Nigella onto the battlefield, we choose Warrior and then they kill Nigella, we've got a commander on the battlefield that's useless to our deck. So changing her creature typing in a pinch with this can be pretty clutch. For all those people wondering, what if Gigantha dies and you're just stuck with a huge amount of high CMC creatures that have a lot of colored pips? We also run Bloom Tinder and Fairbrew Elder. So these will basically be another copy of our companion in case we lose our companion. That way we are never casting a ton of mana for, all of those pips. Or at least that's the plan. Farseek, 3 Visits, and Nature's Lore are going to be solid color fixing for the deck, making it to where we can get those triumphs and fix our colors. This is a 5-color deck, so these cards are extremely useful in it. Soul Ring, obviously, we're playing Commander. Then we have Simic Signet, Selesnya Signet, and Arcane Signet. This is going to give us access to green, which is one of the most important colors in the deck for ramping and color fixing. Moving on to card draw, there is a lot of creature-based card draw in the deck because this is a creature-based deck. Edric Spymaster. Not only is this going to incentivize our opponents to attack people, leaving them wide open for our strategy, it's also just going to draw us a lot of cards. Marnia's Calgar. Whenever we're creating those tokens, we are drawing cards, and there there's a ton of ways to create tokens in this deck. Also, he's just a 3/5 with double strike, which is going to be a solid beater. Curiosity Crafter, now whenever those tokens are dealing combat damage, again, we're just drawing more cards. Toski Bearer of Secrets, this is the theme. Deal damage with our tokens and draw cards. Chulane, Teller of Tales, this guy's going to be super solid. Not only has he card advantage, he is also going to be able to bounce our commander back to our hand, doing the sort of Hearth and Home thing, but we will have to pay for it. We also do get ramp with this guy, which is solid. Inga Enasika is another card that will allow our creatures to tap for mana. There's a lot of tapping and untapping shenanigans in the deck just because of our commander, and this just adds to it. And then if we use enough mana to cast those creature spells, we are also going to draw a card off of that, so that's super solid. Windfall and Wheel of Misfortune are just solid ways to take our hand from nothing to full, which is going to be amazing because we do have the ability to just cast our hand out because of how effective our companion is. Esper Sentinel and Rhystic Study are extremely expensive cards, but extremely useful cards, especially when we are having to use a companion strategy that eliminates a lot of the card draw options that I would really like to use in this deck. Moving on to removal, we have straight up permanent removal with Generous Gift, Beast Within, and Assassin's Trophy. Anguish Unmaking also makes the cut. It doesn't hit lands, but hey, it's still incredibly impactful. Blasphemous Act can not only straight up win us the game if we have Spiteful Sliver on the battlefield, but it is also just an incredibly efficient board wipe. Supreme Verdict, not that efficient, but it is very effective. Being able to exile whatever strategy is going off is going to be incredibly useful. And last but not least, we have Raise the Palisade. This is going to be amazing since it is a tribal deck, right? If we don't have MaskWood Nexus on the battlefield, it will bounce our tokens, but hey, that's a small price to pay for bouncing everybody else's everything. And with that being said, guys, that brings us to the end of the deck tech. I really hope you enjoyed this one. I really liked building it, and honestly, playtesting it is a blast. Don't forget to follow me on Moxfield so you never miss a deck list, and as always, I hope this helped you in your deck building endeavor.